This is the penultimate Summer of AI presentation. My name is Jamie Nelson. I'm one of the organizers of the Summer of AI. Do not fret. There'll be maybe less frequent, but there will be ongoing events throughout fall as well. And if you're interested in, hey, I have some things to say about AI, feel free to let the organizers know or whatever. We'd be happy to include you. Today's session is titled Research Ethics and Generative AI. Thank you for joining us for a talk around ethical issues in research, which are typically framed as responsible conduct of research, or RCR. RCR principles include honesty and transparency. The RCR lens is a useful way to evaluate the use of generative AI in research tasks, including AI-assisted literature reviews, experimental protocol development and writing. Maybe it's even in a teaching and learning way, or use that model in other ways. Our presenter is Patty Jones, Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation and Compliance, Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation. I personally wanted to thank Patty for the many great contributions she continues to make to the university, but namely, this one, in the Summer of AI context, keeping us up to date and informed with postings in the generative AI in education and generative AI in research groups on Microsoft Teams. Love keeping you have a nice kind of balanced formula of presenting news articles to us, and I really appreciate that, and keeping those communities alive. And by the way, please feel free to join those communities. They're open communities in Teams. Again, if you can't find it, reach out, or maybe I'll be able to throw in some links in the chat in a second. If you have any questions throughout this event, do not hesitate to place them in the Zoom chat window. A host will collect them and notify the presenter. Thumbs up on your message is just to confirm that, hey, we saw your message, and then we're waiting for the right time to kind of insert that here. If you're in person, of course, raise your hand. Thank you for attending. I hope you enjoy, and I'll let Patty take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Jamie. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here today. As Jamie said, my name is Patty Jones. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Compliance. So my day job is focused on necessary research compliance in the areas of human subjects, animal care, laboratory safety, and other areas. But I'm also, by training, a human factors engineer who has worked in complex systems with research questions about human automation interaction. So therefore, AI was my minor in grad school. So I've always had an interest, and I would not say I'm an AI expert at all, but I do have a perspective on how AI engages with the research enterprise and how we can do that ethically and responsibly. So in my talk here, I'm going to, and again, I'm going to acknowledge Chris Lehman. He's our Research Integrity Officer, and he and I have presented a series of responsible conduct of research talks on this topic. And I have a class that's listed in industrial engineering, but anybody can take it on campus as long as you're a junior, senior, or grad student. So it's open to everybody. Just a 1-hour class on the responsible conduct of research. And I do one lecture on AI stuff. And so that's where a lot of these slides come from. So just to attribute those properly. In this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the nature of research and incentives in academic culture, and then that will lead us into responsible conduct of research, and then the question of artificial intelligence, and especially generative AI. And again, please put questions in the chat, or if you're here in person, raise your hand if you have any questions. So, and again, my slides are quite wordy, not because I'm going to read them, just so you have a good record of things to read after this presentation. So I want to emphasize that research is a systematic inquiry. So research isn't just messing around and being random. Professional research is meant to be a systematic investigation that either generates knowledge or perhaps invents new kinds of technologies. And there's often a distinction between research and development, research being focused on the acquisition and generation of fundamental knowledge, and development being the development of new technologies or insights and those kinds of things. So we have several definitions here that are all kind of echoing that sort of theme. And I do want to say that systematic doesn't just mean like a chemistry experiment. So sometimes people think what we mean by research is only the sciences, and that's really not true. Scholarship is a very, very broad term, but I think it's helpful to think about, and some of you who read philosophy of science may have seen this distinction in other ways, that there's kind of what I don't like to say is objective versus subjective, although many people kind of use those terms. And I prefer the terms falsifiable versus maybe interpretive. So if you think about experiments that have a hypothesis that collect quantitative data that use statistical methods to prove or disprove a claim, that's kind of the falsifiable scientific method. But there's a lot of scholarship that's different than that. It's more interpretive. It can be very rich qualitative work, and it can lead to a lot of new insights and interpretations as well. But in any event, any kind of scholarship that happens, any kind of research that happens, you, the researcher, are always making choices about what counts as a legitimate area of study, what counts as an acceptable method, what counts as a good literature review, etc. So these are all the kinds of rich world of research that we live in. And if you think about the process, here is a generic process that meets practically anything. What is your strategy? Then what is your plan? You're going to actually do stuff, have an outcome, and hopefully have an impact. Sure. In the research world, we might say you have a lot of lines of inquiry you want to pursue, and how are you going to do that? And then what your plan is often interpreted in the university context as you're going to write a proposal. You're going to write a proposal to get funding to do your research, or you're going to write a proposal to publish a book. But in any event, you have to actually articulate something in writing that is your plan of action. And then you actually do your scholarly work, which is often conceived as literature review, data collection, analysis. And then along with that, which I like to remind professors, is there's a lot of administrative work in research too. You have to hire students, you have to buy stuff, and you have to know how to do all that properly as well, with help from your department, of course. And then you have an outcome, and often the outcome is a publication. Not always, but publications in peer-reviewed journals are a key part of scholarship, but you might have other kinds of outcomes as well. And then there's many dimensions to impact and how you're building on prior knowledge to have a new insight into something, and that leads to many things later in the future. Or it could mean to patents, it could mean policy changes. There's lots of potential kinds of impacts. Since we're talking about AI and data, I think that having this kind of, and many of you have seen this kind of little graph before, of data is not the same as information, which is different from knowledge, which is different from wisdom. And so I like this particular graphics progression of data with context is informative, information with meaning is knowledge, and knowledge plus insight means wisdom. And I think it's important to note that a computer is not going to it's not going to have information or be wise. It's like that's a human thing. Certainly, we can have technologies help us in these ways, but it's a human thing that we understand context and meaning. When I used to do research myself as a professor, I had these interesting talks with my colleagues in communications about what it meant to know something and have context. And so I was like, I'm building a Blackboard architecture and I'm putting knowledge objects on it, and that's my context. And my social sciences people were like, "What?" I'm like, "Well, that's how you do it if you're a computer science person." So again, there's this dialectic between representation in a computational way versus what knowledge or meaning somebody takes from it. But also, it's helpful to think about this when you think about what are my research products and potential impacts. I can do research and provide a bunch of data sets, like surveying how birds migrate. Okay, obviously I can publish the data set itself, and I can publish papers about it, and I can do patents, and eventually influence the national or an international conversation, have policy changes, etc. So this might be another way to think about various kinds of research products. I used to work for NASA, and at NASA, it's all about missions, and therefore we have the notion of technology readiness levels, which many industries have adopted as well. This is the basic idea that how do you go from your lab experiment to flight, or lab experiment to the real world? And so you can characterize your research work in this other way as well. And this means other kinds of outcomes, such as licenses, patents, startup companies, commercial systems, etc. So this is another kind of framework to think about what are your product outcomes and impacts. But whether you're more on the engineering side or social science or humanities or science, I still think that it's the basic academic culture is that a productive scholar either contributes to the generation of knowledge or the development of new technologies, and also you're always training the next generation. So supporting grad students and undergrads is also critical. And you might have heard of these little phrases: publish or perish, or demo or die. So that kind of means that besides all the other things that we're trying to do as scholars, ultimately, if you don't publish or produce, you're going to be in trouble. You're either not going to get tenure, or you won't graduate, or you just won't be a very influential person or not seen as successful. So you got to publish, or maybe you got to demonstrate your technologies. So that's why I will later talk quite a bit about generative AI and publications and authorship, because authorship and giving appropriate credit is such a crucial part of our academic culture. So that's what I'll have quite a bit of stuff on later. And just as a sidebar, I want to say that if you are interested in how can we properly credit people for things, one taxonomy is called credit, the contributor role taxonomy, and it's been used by a lot of multidisciplinary teams in various areas of research as a framework for them doing their thing. One example is the Many Babies Consortium on Developmental Psychology, and their rule is you get to be an author on a paper if you have inhabited at least 2 of the 14 roles in the credit taxonomy, one of those roles being a reviewer or editor of the manuscript. So you have to have touched the manuscript. You didn't have to write it all yourself, but that's their particular rule. And again, lots of teams can use that framework to have different rules. But I'll come back to this when we talk about AI and publications. So Jamie mentioned the notion of the responsible cognitive research. Many of you may not even know this is a thing, but it is a thing. There's whole textbooks about it. So this is the book that I use in my class is called The Responsible Cognitive Research, 4th edition. It's co-authored by David Resnick, who has been working at the NIH as a bioethicist for many years, and he's one of the key figures in the ethics of research. And the whole book is organized around these 19 areas, but I just want to focus a little bit on some of the highlighted stuff here. So honesty. So obviously research misconduct means you've been dishonest, faked data, et cetera, or plagiarized. So that's bad. Being honest obviously is a value, is one of the most core values. As I just said, giving credit where credit is due is a second key thing. And then, of course, related to AI in particular is being transparent and being accountable. So, um, so showing your work and disclosing what tools you've used is going to be the core of what I'm going to say about the research aspects of using AI. But there's lots of other things here too. And if you're interested, please take my class or read the book. There's a lot of great stuff in there. The other thing is the university also has a policy that's similar to this. You may not have heard of it before, but here it is. It's on the Vice President for Academic Affairs website at the university system office level, and it's a document called Integrity in Research and Publication Policy. So this is where we actually see a lot of the RCR principles echoed in our own university policy. And again, I've just highlighted 2 of them here as attributing authorship based on appropriate criteria and attributing credit for work through proper acknowledgement and citation. So again, it's not just authorship, it's also citing relevant works and acknowledging other helpers in the acknowledgement sections of your manuscripts. So these are, again, some of the bedrock things that we'll use to think about how we use AI in research. And you might have a general question, which is it okay to outsource anything I'm doing to any kind of automation at all? And I would say, sure, you can use Excel instead of things by hand. You can use a calculator, you can use SPSS. Obviously, you can use lots of tools that are automating your work. But again, and this is very much similar to my research on how do you automate air traffic control, or what's going on in the flight deck of a commercial airliner, or what astronauts do on a space station. Sure, you can automate things, but you have to be clear that the human is still in charge, and the human is still has authority and responsibility for that activity. And then what we want the automation to have been designed to do is to provide transparency and accountability. So like if you're a researcher, you're choosing a tool like ChatGPT, but you're going to deploy it in a certain context. You're going to use it in a certain way. And whatever you're doing, you can do that, but you need to disclose it properly. And again, the details of that are going to be very dependent on your field and your journal, etc. So justifying the choice, explaining how it works, these are all kinds of things that lead to the RCR principles that your work is logical, coherent, correct, reproducible, appropriate, etc. So now let's turn to the question of generative artificial intelligence in the context of research. So could generative AI, or maybe other kinds of AI like logical AI or different kinds of search engines or Bayesian belief networks or whatever, could they assist you? Sure. You could say that, I'm going to do a landscape analysis. Perhaps I'm going into an area of my work. And so sure, I can read a bunch of papers, but perhaps I want to have assistance in doing a landscape analysis of literature in some ways. And certainly publishers are trying to sell AI products now to do just that. Could I figure out potential collaborators by having generative AI help me with things? And is beyond just a search engine. Maybe sure, maybe that would be okay. Um, could you use generative AI to actually do a literature survey, help you design an experimental protocol, a management plan, or deal with boilerplate text? I'm kind of a fan of just using templates. We don't have to generative AI ever do everything, but sure, there are probably ways that are, and as I will say, there are ways you can do that, and that's okay. Um, could you generate a plan of work from a proposal? Could you have robots in your chemistry lab do experiments for you? You may, sure. Robots are in labs right now, grabbing stuff, mixing stuff, letting it. There's a famous machine called a belly dancer, and if you need to mix a chemical for 12 hours straight, you don't have a person standing there shaking it. You put it on a little platform, it just kind of goes around. Obviously, there's all kinds of automation that's helpful in doing research. So you can, to some extent, you can use generative AI with these things. We'll see a number of news stories later in this presentation about AI-assisted authorship, peer review, or journal editor. So again, how far do you want to go to have AI generate things for you is, again, there is a line, and I'll talk about that line. And then impact, maybe there's ways for that to be helpful as well. And I want to point everybody to the Gen AI resources page on our campus. So there's, I used to have a slide about the fact that we have Microsoft Copilot and the Illinois chat, and all those things are on this website. So we certainly have tools that the campus has vetted, that the campus has approved for use, and it is possible for you to use those tools ethically. So I think starting with those tools and then using ethical guidance, as we'll describe here, is a reasonable combination. But I think that generative AI itself is extra interesting. While any tech could have biases built into it, so like input data, algorithm, output, that could, whether it's generative AI or it's something else, AI or machine learning or other kinds of automation, sure, if it's built badly, it won't work well. And if it's biased or idiosyncratic, you'll get garbage out too. So there's always the garbage in, garbage out question. But generative AI is uniquely weird in this way because with the same inputs, doing it twice in a row, you'll get different outputs. And so that is a key issue here with the unreliability of generative AI. So again, it might be okay in certain contexts, but you got to be careful. And so it's still on you, the human researcher, who has responsibility for this activity, to actually double check that and not use it if it's garbage, etc. Yes, question.
Yeah, we have a couple questions, and again, maybe if you're gonna hit it later, you can say,
Okay.
I'm hitting that later, whatever.
Okay.
So two things. Ember Duns asked, maybe it's coming later,
Okay.
but if you are training the next generation of scholars.
Yes.
How do you advise them? I mean, you're kind of talking about some of this. Anyway, advise them in using and when to use generative AI.
I think I will come to this. I'll be talking about kind of best practices and where there's a line. So I think this is a basis both for your own work and then how you might train your students.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right, so Amber, if you got further questions, when
Yes.
Patty gets it. And then we have one more. David Favor asked, is there any role for AI in the blind review process?
I will, in terms of reviewing proposals for funding, that's a tricky question, and I will come to. I do have a couple of recent news articles about some AI generated scandals and peer review. So yeah, you can. I guess you can always, just like you can choose to outsource things to any kind of a tool, or you're a grad student or whatever. You still got to check the work and be like, take responsibility for it. So that's, whether it's you handing something off the chat GPT or you asking some new grad student to do something for you, it's some of the same vibe of you're still responsible for that and you still got to check the work and you still have to know things. Okay. I did want to point out though, there's a book that you might want to get. It's called Introduction to AI Safety, Ethics, and Society. And this again, this is a free ebook, at least it used to be. I haven't checked it recently. But again, this talks about the different kinds of biases that can be built into systems. And again, there's lots of examples of this and that we've seen in the news of technology systems making the wrong inference or misclassifying things based on bad data. There's also a hilarious book that I like. It's called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. Have you heard of this book? It's by Janelle Shane. Janelle Shane's an AI blogger, and before ChatGPT, she was blogging about neural networks. So it's a similar idea. So it's not generative AI, but it's the same idea of you can train your neural network to give outputs. And so she trained her neural network on pick up lines at bars. What would you say to a person to, get to know them better and whatever. And so you look like a thing and I love you is one of the neural network generated pickup lines. That's the title of her book. My other example, quick.
This book, that's is still.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Yes, so we have an audience member who just went to this website and it's still working. Yes, so there you go. There's a free book there to also continue this conversation. But my favorite example from Janelle's book is she also gave it millions of recipes and she had her neuromarketer try to generate new recipes. And so my favorite example of a recipe this thing generated is called clam frosting, which does not contain clams and is not a frosting. So again, it's just wonderful. So it's funny it's great examples to kind of, again, build in that skepticism of what AI is capable of doing. So I enjoy that book a lot too. Okay, so again, I'm going to go back to the university's policy on practicing research integrity or engaging in the responsible conduct of research. So this is the same kind of list of 13 things I showed you before. And I would say, and this can be true for your own scholarship and also how you engage your students, is I would say AI can assist sometimes, but not everywhere. So sometimes, and again, selectively deploying it in certain contexts, I think is acceptable. You can figure out, should I use a Latin square design or something else for this study? There's a bunch of questions you might have about methods or experimental designs that, maybe you can learn something from an AI tool. Certainly data analysis has lots of options there. Again, designing replicable research, and support. The reason I say support protecting research subjects is I've talked to our director of the IRB office, and IRB does not care how you come up with your informed consent documents, to your human participants. So that's one of the examples I'll say later. You've got your complex NIH proposal, but you have to rewrite it for 8th grade reading level so your human subjects can understand it. We don't care if you use Gen AI to do that. That might be a good case. So as long as obviously the thing it's generating is correct, you can't say that, well, my experimental design is that you're going to come into the lab 4 times a week for 3 months, and that Generative AI thinks says something different. Duh, you got to fix that, right? But sure, there's a number of cases where AI can be a helpful support. And again, the peer review one is what I'm going to come back to because it is clearly not working that well right now. And so there are some kinds, but again, some of the things where, supporting the growth of your mentees and maintaining a safe environment for your group and attributing authorship correctly, these are things that generative AI, I don't think is not going to do. So I would say that this is a fairly decent roadmap for the kinds of things you could do in a research context with some AI assistance. So I mentioned that authorship is a big deal. So I just condensed a bunch of stuff I have into one slide here. So there's tons of guidance on who gets to be an author on a manuscript, and it really depends on where you are publishing. So it depends on what professional society you're part of and or the exact journal you're publishing in and or the publishers, and sometimes we have these general resources as well. So the professional societies, that's American Chemical Society, Association for Computing Machinery for Computer Scientists, IEEE is for engineers, ASME is mechanical engineering, Modern Language Association, the American Institute of Physics, and the American Psychological Association, and hundreds more. So that's why our university policy is so broad, saying, use appropriate guidance, because it really depends on what field you're in about what is acceptable related to just the question of authorship in general. And again, that really gets down to specific journals sometimes as well. I guess I don't have on here that the other thing is many, but not all of these places have guidance for authors on how to use Gen AI or not. So I think I might have one slide later about this, but yes, if you look at your authorship guide, which includes things like, what font to use and how to label figures and how to do citations, all that stuff. Also now, many journals, professional societies, etc., will have guidance on the use or not of generative AI. And almost none of the ones that I've seen actually forbid you from using Gen AI at all. The main thing, as I will say later, is you should disclose what you're doing. And how you disclose it and where you can do it is, again, very dependent. Oh, that's my next slide, actually. Okay, so here we go. So basically, best practices are to disclose your use and then follow specific guidelines. For example, Springer Nature says, you should describe this in the methods section of your paper, but don't use Gen AI art unless you have the right contract in place to allow that. So they don't want to be sued for reusing art and not giving artists credit. Okay, so that's Springer Nature, but Elsevier says The only legitimate use is to improve readability and disclose its use. So you write your thing. And if English isn't your first language and you want to tell ChatGPT to generate this as if I was an English gentleman or something, sure, you could do that. And that's it. Okay. So that's what they say. IEEE says, go ahead and use GenAI in text, code, images, and just say so in your acknowledgments. So again, you're the human author. You're still responsible for your work. You just got to explain, just like anybody else would explain, how did I come up with this conclusion? How can you, the reader, understand my claim and the substance behind it? You got to do that here as well. And so that's part of our best practices online. But again, all the specific contexts really depend on where you are publishing. So again, I say this, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this example just because, like I said, authorship is so critical to the academic culture. The same thing is true with patents, and other kinds of things that are written. I have a few news stories here about AI and peer review, which I find interesting. So back in March, Nature published this piece about how AI is transforming peer review. And people are certainly testing it out and again, it's interesting to me that in the academic culture, peer reviewers are usually just unpaid labor, but everybody participates because you yourself want to publish and then you want other people to peer review your stuff. And again, peer review really means having really great people at your educational level, prestigious people who have valuable time. They're going to spend time doing peer review. You want this to be a very good process. And if this process breaks down, that's bad for all of research, not just your paper. So on the one hand, it makes sense that, if you have an extremely tedious, huge workload of peer reviews to do, could you have AI tools help you do flagging and other things? And so, yes, that's possible, polishing their prose. But do you want to go as far as having an AI generate the whole thing? I would say no. So that's one interesting article to check out. Just in the last couple of weeks, Le Monde, the French newspaper, there was a great example of this guy actually at UL Kentucky is compiling cases of misuse, where nonsense papers seem to be getting through peer review and being published. So peer review seems to be failing, and so therefore we're seeing garbage, and so that's unacceptable. So that's part of what's happening is this question, and there's a lot more in that Le Monde article. And then Times Higher Ed said he submitted a paper, and the paper, after a year, gave him a bunch of instructions about how to improve his statistical analysis, and he had no stats in his paper. So it's like clearly this peer review went out without a real human actually reading his paper, seeing the comments. And so it's like a failure of the peer reviewer using ChatGPT in some weird way, and the journal editor also not being responsible and catching that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff is happening right now, where people are going ahead and using tools, and again, garbage in, garbage out. So again, where is the line? I would say consider your responsibility as a researcher, show all your work, be honest, transparent, accountable. And I would say you can do some of the green stuff, I think is okay, but you always disclose it and clearly explain what you're doing. Again, like I said, you can rewrite a section of your complex grant proposal into an 8th grade reading level for your human subject research. You can upload, Illinois Chat is great if you want to upload a bunch of documents and just get a gist out of it without you spending, 15 hours reading everything. That's not bad. That can be pretty helpful. Probably it's okay to make things more inclusive or suggest tweaks to a plan. That's probably okay. But abdicating your responsibility is not acceptable. So just do my dissertation for me. Just do my whole lit review for me. No, that's not being a good scholar. You are meant to be responsible for these things. And I mentioned The Line here because there is a good book called The Line. And I love this quote from Emily Bender. We now have machines that can mindlessly generate words, but we haven't learned how to stop imagining a mind behind them. So there's still this notion that because Gen AI did something, it's like it's real or it's really thinking or I should really use it. And and to me, that comes from a place of we have technology, we as humans do a lot of pattern recognition, and we as humans have a tendency to suspend our disbelief. Why do we cry at movies? Why do we laugh when we read a book? It's because we've gotten into it. We know we're reading a book. We know this movie is a fiction, but yet it affects us. So I think there's this mixture of the rich plausibility of AI products, the fact that we are pattern recognizers, all of us looking for meaning constantly, and we're willing to suspend our disbelief, and that's why we start falling in love with AI and want to and just believe it. And that's the thing we got to fight against, and just be judicious about how we do things. And then finally, I have a bunch of backup slides here, and I'm not going to go through them but I just wanted to point them out for people to read later. There's an interesting paper here on standards for how to do AI-based science. So these guys have things about things like don't use the same data to train your model as you do to use it, etc. So there's a bunch of guidance here that I think is helpful. Fairlytrained.org is an approach to say we will let artists have their stuff be vetted by us, and so we certify that these data sets are fair to be used by generative AI tools later. So it's a way to protect artists and creators, but from being exploited by AI. And then this book, The Line, is really provocative. What is a person? What is not a person? Person versus fetus, slave, animal, chimera, corporation. So this is really hot stuff. So I would say, and I have a couple of quotes here as well, this is a really interesting book. So people who are interested to think about what does it mean to be human, this is an interesting thing. For people interested in authorship ethics, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I've listed 3 papers here. The first 2 are on images and not manipulating your images, and also a general paper by Wager and Kleiner. So again, there's a lot of good stuff out there about authorship ethics. There's good stuff out there about governance. NIST is still doing its work on AI risk management. The EU has just published new stuff on from its AI Act. And then there's some other articles as well on ethics of AI. And again, our generative AI futures group that met last year, we talked about in the fictional world. There's a lot of people have imagined what society will be like with various kinds of AI, from Westworld to Battlestar Galactica to Frankenstein to Murderbot. And so we have a lot of stuff there to think about as well. Thank you, and please scan the QR code to complete your survey. Thank you very much. All right, happy to take questions. Yes.
I don't know whether university has a plan to educate students or
Mhm.
faculty or staff to see and this kind of training, because I myself I use generative AI for many works,
Mhm.
but I didn't really see solid training
Mhm.
use generative AI effectively. So I'm just
Right.
curious.
Right.
We are really fascinated with all those technology
Yes.
stuff.
So I think the Solutions Hub on campus, has it's sort of been the first wave of activity or an organized activity at the campus level in this way. And so that was kind of a combination of if you're on the generative AI in research, which is the one which I post to a lot, and then the generative AI in education, which I post to sometimes, those are teams where people are mostly just posting articles, but sometimes we have conversations going about things. And I think it's possible to deploy those teams to have more conversations. But again, the other outcomes of the Solutions Hub were we did that survey of the campus like maybe 2 years ago now, and from that, I got to see the results being in the hub, and so it was interesting to learn about all the stuff people are already doing. So there's like 40 tools at the time that people were using, not just ChatGPT. There's GitHub Copilot, and then there's specialized tools for lawyers to go find cases and stuff. There's like tons of interesting things out there. And then from that, our hub articulated use cases for research, teaching, and administrative work, and we have best practices, I guess. And to me, and we kind of started off by saying, well, the next level would be kind of policy. And so we did look at that a bit, but I think what's happening now is the hub doesn't need to exist as an organizational unit per se. Instead, what's I think is going to happen is the chief information officer and the provost are going to work on this with us to say we should have a campus policy about the use of things like this. Other universities already do, and they say things similar to what I've said here. So I think that there is going to be, and actually maybe it'll actually be added to this university policy on integrity in research and publication. Like that's a system level policy for all three campuses. So I think partly the answer is things will be enshrined in policy. I think also that we definitely realize that there needs to be constant communication and training about this. So certainly CITL itself will continue to do things. Secondly, the library is a fantastic resource. If you just go to the Savvy Researcher workshops they have AI and qualitative data analysis, AI and evidence synthesis. They have a bunch of, good things. And then in the research world, people again are using these kinds of tools. And I think, and again, it's not building AI per se, it's using it to do your thing. So like the Molecule Maker Lab at IGB and Beckman is using AI tools to do synthetic chemistry, next generation drug development. And so there's lots of cases like that where people are using tools to like accelerate innovation. So therefore, and again, our campus is very decentralized, so we will tend to have top level policy be pretty broad, okay, and you still got to develop it further in your own context. And because I was developing this RCR course, there are other courses that talk about ethics and professional development, but they're kind of scattered and they're often lumped into, new grad student orientation for their first semester. It includes how to be a good researcher kind of thing. So partly it's there. I would still say it's kind of scattered. And interestingly, so I think that OVCRI, CITL, the CIO, Provost Office, we can continue to work together on promulgating things and offering more resources for stuff. But that's a good question. Yes.
We have a couple online, but we'll do one.
Yes.
Austin Ciphersmith asks, besides a sense of wanting to be responsible researchers, how do we incentivize ethical use of AI? I'm mostly thinking in the context of peer review.
Yeah, that's a great, as you can see, peer review has been problematic when people just misuse it, or again, so to me, there's like several different things there. I mean, one is the whole academic publishing model has been criticized for a long time as, okay, the library has to pay a lot of money to subscribe to all these expensive journals. And the people who work for the publishing company, they have salaries. The journal editors, who are usually faculty at universities, might get a stipend. So some of them do. Like I used to be an associate editor, I got paid nothing. My sister used to be an associate editor on a really big journal, and she actually got a stipend to pay for her, and they paid for a person to help her. So like if you're a really big journal, you will have some support, but it's nowhere, near the scale that you actually need, and then all the peer reviewers are just all people who are professors who are doing it for free because again, it's part of the unpaid labor of the academic enterprise. So partly I think, and again, your peer review is like totally a private thing. And since I've published myself and I've been a peer reviewer too. I mean, it's depressing when the peer review comes back, it's okay. And like the easiest thing to review as a reviewer is if this is awesome, no changes for me, or if this is so bad, get it. In the middle, it's a lot of work to say, under what circumstances, how would you improve this paper kind of thing. And then the journal editor having to synthesize 3 or 4 peer reviewers into feedback for the author to be fair and but also to have that level of quality. So peer review to me is a fraught thing as well. And it seems to be a totally private thing. So it's never public. It's almost never public. People have experimented with having peer reviews be blind. Well, they certainly are anonymous in the sense that you know who the author is, and obviously what journal they're publishing to, and you're just known as a reviewer too. They don't you never say who you are. So, and of course, people have sometimes experimented with like, oh, shouldn't you get credit for being a peer reviewer by having your name on? The answer is no. You're going to be polite, or you're not going to want to piss off this famous person or whatever. So there's all kinds of reasons why doing anonymous peer review is good. But also, again, the hope is that peer reviewers have been selected that because they're relevant experts in the discipline and will give good feedback. So I think, so to me, it's a really tough question because nobody's checking. The only people checking your work as a peer reviewer is the journal editor who's getting the 3 or 4 peer reviews from this article. And so over time, a journal editor might decide, you're being a weirdo peer reviewer, and I'm just not gonna use you anymore. But again, being a journal editor is often an unpaid labor of love / duty. And So that's why I think like the real answer is to change the nature of academic publishing to actually not have so much unpaid labor going on, but have some more uh, better support for. But that's like way beyond the scale of this talk. So I feel like there's not really a good way, I would say, that it's just it kind of comes down to your own personal ethics. And again, there's been a lot of writing about this. You know, can you train somebody? You know, how can you incentivize somebody to be an ethical person? It's a great question, and part of the answer seems to be some people learn that. And I've also seen a quote like, "If you're not an ethical person by age 7, it's going to be tough." You know, so there's a lot there. So I don't really have a great answer for that, but that's a really provocative question.
Oh, good. The other question here is you mentioned Copilot and Illinois Chat.
Yes.
How do you see people using these tools well or not well? Or how do you use AI?
I myself I've been on the beta test site for Copilot for like a year now, and I actually have almost never used Copilot at all. And the reason for that is I don't need a machine to generate text for me because like most of my job is writing things. Most of my job is either writing an email or writing a protocol or writing a policy. And it's usually a very nuanced, complex issue. So I know what I want to say. And because I know what I want to say, I don't need any AI to help me say it, kind of thing. Um, and on the few times that I've experimented with I would say the only times that I find that I would use it myself is if I have a necessary task that I don't care about. Okay, like for example, if there was some weird accreditation thing where I had to write some kind of an essay about something and it was required, I might like be like, I don't know. So then I might draft something or I might throw some stuff to Illinois Chat to generate an idea. And maybe I do that, because if I think it doesn't matter, it's like necessary but not important. That might be a case where I might do something. But on the other hand, I can see where if you're doing a new interdisciplinary field of study, like let's say you're a computer scientist working with a social scientist on some technology that's going to be like in the workforce or in a hospital or whatever. Um, I think in some cases it's really if your collaborators are good at educating you about how things are in their field, then maybe that's enough. But it might be like helpful to say, let me throw 10,000 papers on social science into Illinois Chat and see if I can answer let me get the gist of this or give me a basic idea. But I usually find for myself that I just go on Wikipedia and read that. So if I want to get the gist of molecular biology or quantitative phase imaging or something, I'll just go to Wikipedia to get an idea, then I'll follow those citations. Maybe I'll buy a textbook, and that's what I would do. Um, and then it's interesting to talk to my kids about this. My youngest is going to be a junior, and my other two have graduated, and they've never used AI. It's like they want to be an authentic person, and it's up to them to do their own things. And so they're not on social media, and they're not using AI. So they just want to be a real person. So, but again, I think it's helpful as a helper. It's like it shouldn't be a permanent crutch. It can be like, I need a boost, man. Give me a boost today. That kind of vibe, I think, is all right. But again, other people, like for instance, in sponsored programs, they have really dove into AI and they use AI all the time for dealing with like contract negotiations or how to give advice to people on complex administrative topics. And one of their long-term employees, they put every email she's ever done for the last 35 years. Her name is Jane. So now we have Ask Jane, Jaine, Jane. And AI Jane can answer a lot of questions for you. So if you can't get to real Jane, asking AI Jane is actually pretty good because it's been a curated set of communications from her and it's carefully curated by the team in SPA so that the answers are good. Therefore, now it's deployed and it's actually pretty helpful. So I think there are cases like that. Yes.
Kind of piggybacking off a previous question, but here, at least in this facility, we know that AI is exciting. We know that there's a lot of people out there that are also like excited about AI, but also like a little bit like kind of hesitant towards it. Like we want to create a space where people can experiment and kind of like engage with these AI like, and these advancing technologies. But going back to like the previous question, how do we create how do we facilitate that skepticism and facilitate teaching that, yes, this is super cool and it's amazing to do so many things, but then also at the same time, like be like, all right, but then here's like some of the limitations. How would you approach some of that?
Well, I think that one thing that NASA and many large organizations have instituted is called a red team review. And the idea is that yes, you have a mission, yes, you have your goals and objectives and your metrics of success, and you have a schedule and you have milestones and all this stuff. And so you're doing your thing, but you have an organized set of people that come in and check your work. Um, Now, sometimes this doesn't work well if the red team is just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But if they're truly engaged, it can be helpful. So that reminds me of an approach that maybe is helpful for you. Like, let's say you wanted to have AI help architects develop cool new building ideas. So you can throw in, a billion, whatever, a million uh, CAD drawings or whatever of buildings, and then you want it to generate new ideas. Well, I think a good way to do this might be to say, okay, let's have the students come in and play around with the ChatGPT version of this, AI architect thing, come up with a bunch of stuff, and they decide they like these ones or that ones. And then the next session is an architecture professor comes in and joins them and looks at what has been generated and actually says, well, they don't even say what the site is, and if they're trying to design for sunlight, you don't even know where the sun is, so like I don't see how that's going to work, or things like they forgot to make room for stairs or whatever. So I think that having the critique, building in the constructive critique into the process from a human expert, I think is a good way to go. So you have the dialectic of ideas generated, but then they're evaluated with expert opinion, real expert opinion. And it could also be interesting if the professor says, "Wow, it came up with that," which is not a good idea in and of itself, but it made me think of this idea, which is interesting. So again, you can have the conversation, kind of keep going that way. So I think so. The red team idea, and we've done this internally at OVCRI as well. We'll work on a policy document. Then about like 15 people who didn't write it, but they should know about it. We send it to them, and they're the critiquers. It's like tear this thing up, please. And so I think again. Um, Engaging in constructive criticism. So the act of criticizing something isn't seen as like antagonistic or rude. It's like, no, this is part of the process to refine. So that's what I would do. I think that kind of stuff would be a good approach. All right.
Okay.
All right.
There's
No further questions.
on
Well,
mine.
thank you very much,
for
sir.
having me.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.